All right, welcome to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I'm your host, Dr. D. Today, we're going to talk about preventive maintenance and governance. Like you go to the doctor, maybe, you take your car in for checkup. So why don't we do the same thing with these really massive billion-dollar government operations? We don't, and I think we should. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. Let's get at her. There's something about that paparazzi beat that I just love. It just kind of gets you pumping and running. Listen, thanks for joining us again here on the podcast. We've got some great stuff coming up for you over the holiday season. Obviously, like everybody else, I'm going to take some time off, spend some time with my loved ones, kind of recharge, celebrate the year that it was. Plus, the World Junior Hockey Tournament is coming to my home city of Ottawa. It is my most favorite hockey tournament, and for the first time, I'm going to get to watch it in person. So with that, we're going to pre-record a whole bunch of really cool content related to getting back to basics. So we're going to call it something along the lines of a Christmas recharge, back to basics, what matters, and get everybody grounded so that we can launch 2025 as an incredible opportunity. And I know you're going to hear that right now, about second week of December probably, but definitely by the first week of December, you're starting to see a lot of the YouTube videos and a lot of the stuff come out saying, hey, 2024, you gave it your best shot. You did a lot of good things. It was a tough year. Let's make 2025 incredible. Like, let's launch right now. Let's be the guy. Let's be the girl. Let's be the man. Make 2025 the year we're going to go crazy and do some incredible things. And I think I'm a big New Year's reflective guy. I'm not about making New Year's resolutions that on the 31st of December, I'm going to drink as much alcohol and eat as much pizza as I can and then hit the gym the first thing in the morning on the 1st, and I will, start to magically transform my life. I actually don't think that way. I use reflection. And I use reflection as I look back on the year. What was the overarching method? What was my overarching intent for that year? And so this is an upcoming episode that I'm going to record next week about thinking about years and reasons and etc. But basically, I look at each year as an intent, right? So I go back and I reflect on, I intended 2024 to be this purpose. How'd I do? Was it appropriate? Was I, because all kinds of things are going to happen to you that are beyond your control. The foundation of a lot of what we talk about here at Inside My Canoe Head is exogenous shocks, right? You have a great plan. You got out of bed this morning with probably an absolutely wonderful set of agenda, or maybe just one or two small items, but you thought this is what you would get up to the day. And then the day showed up, and then the day intervened, and Mr. Murphy knocked on the door, and whatever else happened that might have switched you off of what you intended to do. 2024 and every year before that and every year after that will be the same. You'll get up thinking that this is the year I finally do X, and then the world steps in, right? It's a systems idea. You have your whole system set up. You think you've orientated your whole system towards supporting this one goal for the year, right? It's a systems thinking. And systems thinking is when you take, for example, at the individual level, we'll talk about individual goals later in another podcast, but you have your personal life, you have your physical fitness, you have your mental health, you have your relationships with your family, you have your professional career, you have your community activities, you have your personal passions and leisures. All of those things are individually important, but together it's a system. And when you have a singular goal that you're after, like 2024, for me, was to get my business up and running to a position where it's profitable and that the marketing is squared away and the products, the orientation, instead of a bunch of fuzzy crap that's in your head, is actually orientated, right? So my end of 2024 is that reflective exercise. I've designed all of my systems towards that. So everything, every little part of my life and my goals, every little part of what I do has an element in support of that goal. It's a systems thinking. I set the system up to get this goal. Now, was I successful or not? That's a reflective exercise. It's always subjective, but it's system. I designed something to achieve a goal, And then I go back and I say, hey, listen, periodically we reflect. Was it successful? Was I reaching the goal that I wanted to do? What happened, etc., X, Y, Z. It makes sense, right? It's kind of like, we always recommend, not everybody does it, but it's recommended that you periodically, especially when you get to my age, I'm 54 now, right? So when you're 54 years old, as much as your brain thinks you're 18 or maybe 25 and what you can do, your body starts to remind you that it is getting a little bit older, a little bit slower, a little bit creakier, right? So you go in for regular, probably annual or biannual appointments with your doctor, and you run blood tests and other tests like that. And what you're doing is just preventive maintenance, right? You're getting some checkups when aches and pains happen or issues pop up. You go see the doctor because you're basically doing preventive maintenance on your human body because you'd really appreciate it if it would last as long as it could, right? You don't get to replace it. You only have one. So at some point in your life, you start preventive maintenance on your system. You do it for your car. You go out, you get a new car. There's a scheduled maintenance schedule for your vehicle. Now, the one from the manufacturer is designed to keep your vehicle alive and running as long as possible. The one from your dealer is designed to extract the most amount of dollar value out of your pocket. Remember, there's a difference between the two. So when your car manufacturer built the car, they understood how the systems work, and they said, okay, for optimal performance, not to just keep it going, but for optimal performance, here is the service schedule that we recommend based on the engineers who built the damn thing. And if you do this, you will have a higher degree of likelihood of longevity and success, which means the purpose for which you bought this vehicle, it will be able to meet that purpose, right? It's a very simple system. But if you apply that to your vehicle, you apply systems thinking to your goal, you apply systems thinking to keep your body healthy by doing annual or regular checkups, why don't we do that in governance? Why don't we do that in systems we design to solve issues? Now, I've spoken at length, both publicly and at conferences and written online, about this culture of dependency we have in Canada and other countries around the world, where people become more and more dependent on the government. Every time there's a bump in the night, we obviously need government intervention and a program to address it, right? Fair enough, set that aside. When we create a government agency, or we assign a responsibility to the government, in other words, we decide collectively as a society that this is something we would like the government to do on our behalf, we provide them the resources we have available through taxation, and the government sets the system up and runs. Usually the start point of all of these government systems is because there is an actual, real, and definable need for public intervention, for government intervention into public life, right? Because that's what government does. It intervenes with how the community operates, but it does so normally, not always, but normally based upon an actual real need to provide assistance, right? We're actually pretty good at setting up, especially for sudden onset things like the pandemic, etc., pretty good at setting up systems to address that. What we're not good at, and what we do, and I would say just an abhorrently poor job of, is reflecting on whether those systems are still required. It's called sunsetting. We don't do it in governance very well at all, right? So we set up a public agency to deliver a service for Canadians or Americans or Europeans or wherever you may be in this world. 82% of our listeners are in North America, but I'm downloaded in 63 countries. So if you're not in North America, I greatly appreciate the fact that you're here. I truly do, because the preparedness message and the overall message is fit for purpose around the world. But when we look at the governance systems, we may have created a government agency or given it a responsibility to execute a task in a time of need, and it did the best it could with the resources it had, right? But what we don't do is go back and sunset it. We don't say that requirement is not here anymore, so we're going to close the department and lay off all of the people that work there, and then we're going to reallocate whatever additional resources to a different area of priority in the government, or we're just going to return them to the public in the forms of lower taxation. We don't do that, right? And because I do a lot of work with the emergency management community, this is something that I see growing and growing of more importance, is we have formally constructed emergency management structures at the municipal, the subnational, and the national level across all kinds of different government systems. We've assigned them responsibilities through legislative authority. And within that legislative authority, they've created a regulatory regime and an administrative law component below that allows for the functioning of the regulatory environment. That was all designed fit for purpose at one point. What governance has a habit of doing is growing in scope creep, mission creep, scope creep. They expand, right? Because as much as we say we're pretty good at starting new agencies, they require legislative authority or at least a significant change in regulatory frameworks to create something new. What is far easier for bureaucracy to do, and I've written earlier this week on Substack about bureaucracy, what's really easy for them to do is to expand the responsibilities and the reach of an existing agency. So internal to the public service, governments will often see an opportunity to expand an existing agency to give them an additional responsibility or to give them a role in a different arena that they weren't originally created for, but that there is at least a reasonably loose affiliation that it makes sense, right? So we have a need to do something in a different arena. The easiest way to do is add the responsibility to an existing thing. So you start to see morphing. And again, I'm not here to say in any way, shape, or form that there is some malicious intent. This is just how governance works. And over time, the beast becomes enormous. It becomes, I've referred to it as an octopus, where its tentacles are intertwined in so many different areas of government. It's now almost necessary to be there for the functioning of government, and it becomes very, very difficult to do any type of trimming, shall we say. So you start to see the expansion for that. The other thing that happens in governance is we see a habit of combining. We have this feeling, and it happened in 1979 in the United States under Jimmy Carter when they brought in FEMA, when they created FEMA out of a whole number of different agencies that had a role, responsibility, and executed some function within the emergency management space as we understood it at the time. And the government thought it would be a good idea to create one agency and roll all the responsibilities into one. Now, the idea behind that is always comes from an efficiency and effectiveness perspective. Number one, efficient means getting better bang for your buck, getting a better or more influential outcome with the same level of resources. In other words, we can find some synergy within combining these agencies together. And effective means if I have one boss, if I have one animal running the show, then across a number of different agencies, then you can have a consistent model of oversight. You can have a consistent model of deliverability, governance, systems, frameworks, regulatory, etc. Right? That's always the idea. But what we never do, and this is what I wrote about this morning on Substack, and you follow me over there under Jeff Donaldson. What I wrote there was, and I'm not arguing that in many cases that's not a smart idea, but what we don't do is go back and have a conversation as to whether it remains fit for purpose. We set up these large beast agencies in governments, and then we let them be. And then we assume they're going to do the job, and they're going to do the job the well, and that we assume the original set of conditions that existed for them to conglomerate, or even for the agency itself to be started, remains present in society. We don't ask the question of not an exercise in cutting X dollars or Y positions, right? This is not an equivalent call for something like Doge that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are coming in to the U.S. government. This is about saying we've allocated $100 million at the subnational level, say, pick a state, pick a Canadian province, pick a UK district, whatever. You have $100 million allocated to the emergency management function. There's 2,500 humans working in it, and we have a certain level of service delivery. Is that system and structure, the way it's established, fit for purpose? Is it the best way? Wrong word. Is there a different methodological way of delivering services to the people that, using the existing allocation, again, this is not about hacking and slashing. This is about whether we can deliver a higher level of service, a more effective level of service to our constituents in the emergency management function within the same set of resources by totally redesigning how we do it and the system that we use to deliver. Again, this is why I differentiate myself from somebody coming in saying we got to cut 10% of the budget, right? It's ridiculous. How do we deliver better services with what we have? And we often hear the phrase do more with less or do more with the same. Well, doing more with the same makes a world of sense if you're willing to change the system. If all you want to do is squeeze the people and the system are in it to try to extract more value, you're going to kill it. You're going to burn people out and you're going to destroy the system. And it's illogical and really just dumb, right? Let's be blunt. It's dumb. But if we have $100 million and 2,500 people, or $100 million and 150 people, whatever the number may be, can we restructure how it's organized, where the legislative authorities are, where the regulatory framework exists, and the administrative rules that are in place? If we look at the whole system, is there a way to redesign that to deliver better service to the public, which is the goal of every single government agency, to deliver a service to the public, but we're going to do it better. We're going to deliver higher quality outcomes for the same amount of money, not because we're going to squeeze the living crap out of the humans that's in it, because we're going to redesign it. And I say this because I spent personally near a decade in strategic level governance arenas at the Canadian national government system, right? As a senior Army officer and as a minor role as a consultant, when you're in that system and you see it, you realize that the service delivery out the end is a small portion of the massive allocation of resources that exist in bureaucracy, that exist in governance. Now, governance is required, bureaucracy is required, regulations are required, and frameworks are required. But the existing one is not. And that's the problem we have, is that everybody just looks at the existing one and says, this is how it's done, which means this must be the right way. My argument is, I don't know if that answer is true, and neither do you. I'm positing that just like we take preventive maintenance reviews of our car, preventive maintenance reviews of our own health, you look at your budget periodically in your household to make sure that you're online. You will look at your calendars periodically to see the commitment levels, to see if you need to trim, or maybe you have a bit of space to help your community out. We do this in all of our lives, but we're abhorrent to look at it within the governance system. Now, I'm using emergency management as an example. You could extrapolate this to healthcare, to national defense, to the management of the environment and natural resources. You could extrapolate this to the transportation system. The fact that we've created a governance model at any level of government for any function was ideally done with great purpose in the beginning, but we never go back and say, is this the only way we can organize this? And does this even need to exist, right? When you talk about the hundreds and hundreds of agencies that exist in the American government that's often quoted, they began for a very good purpose. Maybe that purpose is still there. Maybe the answer is that organizations are fit for purpose, right? That they should exist in the way they do. But I'm going to offer to you, you can't answer that question until you ask, until you inquire. And so the piece that I wrote this morning was entitled Scalpel or Chainsaw? We don't know the answer when it comes to emergency management governance, because there are people, and this is applicable to voices across the spectrum at different areas of the government. There are people who want to Control Alt Delete it. And for those of you who are old enough to remember, that's a reset. That's basically back to system function, basically getting rid of it. Some people think that the entire emergency management governance system needs to be deleted. Some think that we just need to take a scalpel and there's a few areas to shave off. I don't know who's right, but what I do know is the system is due, as all systems are, for an honest, intelligent, logical, methodological approach to the overall structure of the governance. I don't know whether there is a better way. I don't know if there's a more efficient way, and neither do you. And my argument is we need to answer that question. When we do that in our public sector systems, what do? The end result and the purpose of this exercise is to, one, make sure that the people are getting the best possible value of service delivered by the government for their systems. But we build trust. And if you look at the data coming out of the OECD, or you look at the data coming out of pretty much any academic source right now, there is a notable reduction in public sector confidence, or confidence in public sector institutions, right? So the population is not supporting or does not view the words and the actions of every public institution as being in their best interest, right? So remember, we as the public allocate resources to the government through taxation. The government creates an agency to deliver a service to us, one that we want. And there's a whole system relationship there. Well, if we don't go back and reassess that, we start to see stupid and dumb things. We start to see massive billion-dollar boondoggles at national institutions here in Canada. And one prime example is what happened during the pandemic. They decided to bring out small business loans, which were great. For example, you could get an $80,000 loan to cover non-reimbursable expenses that fixed expenses you had to pay, like rent and utilities and insurance and all these things, if your business was shut down by mandates or reduction in business due to COVID. And if you paid back over a schedule 3/4 of that, so you paid back $60,000, the government would actually forgive the last $20,000 if you paid the $60,000 in time, right? It was a great idea. It was a timed policy intervention. The problem is that the government of Canada did not have a department that was capable of running that. So they gave it to an export agency, and they gave it to a crown corporation. The reason they gave it to a crown corporation is crystal clear in hindsight, is that crown corporations don't necessarily need to follow the procurement rules. So the government of Canada knew this program was going to get outsourced to a contractor to run for all intents and purposes. And because they could not do so in a rapid fashion through the existing procurement rules, the government of Canada had to go outside of their own procurement rules, assign it to a crown corporation, knowing that they could sole source that directly with an agency they already had a relationship with. Now, there's a whole, and it's apparently this morning in the news, that's going to be over $1 billion in costs related to delivering that program. We don't know if any of those systems still are required. We don't know if anybody has gone back and looked and said, okay, we had this emergency. Maybe we need to have a system in place so that the next time this occurs, right? This is the reflective exercise that is not being done in our governance model, right? We never go back and verify these things. So what you have is you have a situation where we see that emergency management, the demands are changing. And in many cases, they're increasing. The issue we have is that there is an exceptional limited number of resources that are available to the government. And right now, here in Canada, we have a lot of socialist ideas that are very prominent, progressive and socialist ideas like improving healthcare, improving education, pharmacare, daycare. All of those will win at the cabinet table 100 times out of 100 over emergency management. It's just the way it works. It's what gets politicians elected, and they have real-term consequences and real-term measurement. So the reality of the world is the purpose of this entire podcast is to ground it in the idea that emergency management as a service delivery by a level of government is not going to receive any notable or significant resource injections, period. So you have what you have. You might get nominal, minor, incremental here and there, announcement of a very small program to big fanfare, but structurally the resources allocated to the emergency management function are done. You have what you have. Now, is it not appropriate that we sit down and say, okay, go back to the example I used before, we have $100 million, we have $100 million, we have 150 humans. What are our options to design that to deliver the desired level of service, right? And so in project management theory, there's something called the critical path process. And that basically is the most efficient pathway from start to finish to get a project done. In the operational planning process in the military, in a lot of operations, we plan backwards. So we plan from the desired outcome. We all agree on what the desired end state looks like. And then we plan backwards to the beginning. All of the steps that are necessary to make that happen. Not forward, but backwards. When we look at emergency management and we say, okay, we know what the desired level of outcome is. We know the desired level of service. And if not, we figure it out for, if we're talking municipal, subnational, or national level, what's the desired level of outcome? And then we work back. And then when we do that independently, we start to see the emergence of different options. And again, this isn't saying what we have is broken. This is saying we've done our due diligence. We've looked at all the different systems that could be in place. We've assessed that they are less than optimal compared to what we have. So the scalpel is the right answer. We need to trim, make a few incremental changes, system, lever adjustments, etc. within the system. But largely, we can say the emergency management is fit for purpose. We can't do that right now because we have not looked at a systems assessment. We have not looked at different methodologies for delivering emergency management services. And no, I'm not talking about alternate service delivery and hiring a corporation to do it. I'm talking about structurally design. And when I mean the national level, think about it. Is the Stafford Act viable in the U.S.? Is the Stafford Act, does it remain a viable piece of legislative authority? In Canada, does the Public Safety Canada Act remain viable? Or should that entire act be repealed and redone? Should the entire structural design of the delivery of emergency management at the government level in the United States of America change? Is FEMA fit for purpose? I'm not saying delete FEMA. I'm not saying cut half of its budget. I'm saying you don't know that answer to that question until you do a systemic review of the systems options that are available out there. That's what I'm advocating for within emergency management. And I would argue you could do that across any governance level spectrum you have. Look at it at all three levels and look at it programmatically across different arenas in the government. You can do the same thing in the education system, right? You can say is the education system fit for purpose? What is the education designed to produce? What is the outcome of our public education system? And is what we have right now producing that? And what are the other methodologies? What are the other ways to reach that desired outcome? And are one of them, or a combination or one or two of them, going to be more efficient and effective than what we have now for the same resource allocation? I think it's worthy to do that. We don't do it. It's time to get our arses aboard and make sure that we're getting the best possible value for dollar. And that considering all of the modern technology and advances, I think we need to have a long, careful look. Hey, listen, thanks for joining us this week in Inside My Canoe Head. I appreciate all of your feedback continually coming back to us. It's great. Drop over to InsideMyCanoehead.ca, our website. Everything you need is there. There's connect directly to my email. Drop over to preparednesslabs.ca, our corporate site. There's a lot of great offerings over there. Support the podcast. Share the podcast. And yes, I know it's going to be another week delay to get our YouTube channel up and running. I'm just a little bit too specific about what I want to see. So I'm having a hard time designing, and I think I got some great advice yesterday from a colleague of mine who said, just put the damn stuff out there and the public will tell you whether it's good or not. So maybe that's what I need to do. I just need to get off my horse and try to, the perfectionist in me, and just get out there and produce some great stuff. And then you'll all, hey, listen, you'll tell me whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, because you give me feedback on the podcast, and I love it when you give me feedback on my videos on YouTube. So they're coming. Trust me. We're going to get this sorted out by the end of the month. 2024, this year was about getting the business up and running and getting a system set up so that we can just market the living crap out of it. In 2025, we're almost there. We're almost there. Not quite. All right. Take care, stay safe, and have yourself an awesome weekend.